Okay, our second speaker of the afternoon is Meng Tian, formerly of Yale University, recently moved to Oxford, and is going to talk to us about some compaction problems in metamorphism.
Thanks, John, for the introduction. So, thanks to everyone for coming here. So, my talk is about compaction-driven fluid flow during metamorphism. I evaluate its effects in three aspects. One is its ability in transferring carbon dioxide. Next one is its thermal effect. The third one is I try to evaluate which process is dominant in terms of compaction and porous convection, because the fluid flow pattern in the mid-lower crust exerts a fundamental control on mass transfer, which has relevance to like economic mineral ore deposits. So the outline of this talk is, first I will give a brief background introduction about the talk, but assuming that people in this room is familiar enough with two-phase dynamics, so I'll only go through it quickly. The second one is the one-dimensional porosity wave model I constructed to look at whether it produces different chemical reaction progress than Darcy flow or not. The third topic is a two-dimensional model to simulate the thermal advection due to channelized decompacting porosity waves and its thermal effect, especially its effect during orogenesis. The last one is still in progress, but I want to show it to see our results, preliminary results about mid-lower crustal fluid flow pattern, whether the pattern is dominantly going upward or it's circulating in a box in mid-lower crust. So first is the background introduction. The two-phase dynamics in geoscience field is motivated by studying the migration of melt during partial melting. So this is a schematic illustration of partially molten rock. In the interstitial interconnected pores are the partial melts, and in three-dimensional it's interconnected if the surface tension allows it to be interconnected. And a natural consideration is when partial melt starts, then these heavy solid matrix will viscously deform and squeeze the latter low viscosity melt upward and towards such a situation. But it becomes complicated when there's inhomogeneous either density or porosity and viscosity. What I want to say is that this two-phase low viscosity partial melts and high viscosity solid matrix, this two-phase system applies similarly to metamorphic system, which also have pore fluid, but that fluid is aqueous fluid composed mainly of water and carbon dioxide. The other thing is the density contrast between the two-phase metamorphic system is a little bit higher, which provide a strong drive for the compaction flow. And then the matrix, rock matrix for metamorphic system also viscously deform below the brittle ductile transition. So the physics of the system parallels the metamorphic system. So take a one-dimensional example. This is a representative volume, and you conserve the liquid mass and the solid mass in one-dimensional. This rho is density, phi is porosity, is the liquid phase fraction, Vf and Vs is their velocity respectively, and then you conserve the momentum. This one is basically Darcy flow, except that you allow a solid velocity. This is the only difference from the Darcy flow in hydrogeology in shallow crust. And then you have a nonlinear relationship between the permeability and the porosity. A is usually the parameter grain size, B is a constant. The next equation you need to close the system is a constitutive relationship, which establishes the relation between stress and velocity, solid phase velocity.
Is gravity
All
But
this
there should be G's on the
is here.
right?
Okay.
It's
And that's
non-dimensional.
gravity, I
Maybe-
believe, too. Yeah.
There should be.
Okay, so when this model is constructed, initially we see the natural compaction is just gradually squeeze the low density fluid out. But when complication like heterogeneous porosity distribution is introduced, porosity wave is predicted to exist for such a system, which in this case, porosity wave is propagating domain of high porosity in the background rock system. But our question as a metamorphic petrologist is, like earlier studies all assume no rock deformation, no solid phase deformation during fluid flow. So it basically assumes the porosity is constant during fluid flow process. And this explains very well the field observations. But when rock deformation is permitted, how this newly proposed transport process differs from the earlier one, how to evaluate this difference. The eventual ultimate question is, how do we identify porosity wave in the field? Do we have any evidence, direct or indirectly? So we approach this problem by examining the metamorphic reaction programs, because we think associated with porosity wave there is pulsive fluid fluxes, and also fluid pressure differs a little bit from lithostatic fluid pressure, which may drive some difference that potentially be identifiable in the field. To look at reaction progress, we pick up a typical carbon dioxide involving reaction in the middle crust, which is basically carbon dioxide is observed by calcite and tremolite to produce dolomite and quartz. This calcite is a carbonate, tremolite is a special type of amphibole, and dolomite is also carbonate, and this is quartz, which is basically silicate. So it's a calc-silicate system which observe carbon dioxide and release part of water. And the model construction is like this. This is a one-dimensional model. There's a reactive layer in the mid-lower crust, and this layer is below the brittle ductile transition. And then we flash porosity waves with different amplitude go through the reactive layer, and they use a connected model to monitor the reaction progress inside this reactive layer. And to contrast this porosity wave transport model, we also flash a dusting flow, keep the porosity constant, and then compare the reaction progress in these two cases. It's like this porosity wave is artificially generated. We first analytically calculated the porosity wave profile and then place it here and let it go. So there's complementary equations needed, which is to conserve the fluid species in the aqueous fluid. Basically, it's water and carbon dioxide. And also, we don't assume there's equilibrium between the rock and fluid. So there's a simplified chemical kinetic relationship where Rj is the reaction rate, which is mainly controlled by the distance from chemical equilibrium. This delta G is the Gibbs free energy change in the system. A is a reactive surface area in the mineral system, which I assume is constant for the time being. And this Kj is a rate constant, which is temperature dependent, as in Arrhenius relationship. For the start, we just assume there's no reaction to look at the transport power of porosity wave. And this is the wave propagation associated with is the XCO2, carbon dioxide fraction. It's the chemical current goes with the wave. It's fast and strong. This about 2% CO2 fraction in the aqueous phase water. And then we switch the reaction on. So allow the reaction to buffer the chemical system. Here is the case for dusting flow. The CO2 change is minimal because the reaction rate is fast. And for this case of porosity wave propagation, there's a pressure, fluid overpressure and underpressure associated with the wave propagation. In this case, because the increased pressure suppresses the reaction, so this this XCO2 profile becomes asymmetric because along this direction there's also temperature change. But you can still see the effect of pressure on XCO2. So this is a simulation showing the process. This is a porosity wave. This is fluid overpressure. This is a phase velocity. This is the temperature. Here is XCO2. You can see pulses of waves go through, but the real carbon dioxide fraction almost doesn't change. It remains close to local equilibrium because the reaction rate is so fast, it buffers it. This is a transient reaction rate, and this is a cumulative chemical reaction progress. So we construct a series of porosity wave flow with amplitude of 5, 2.5, and 1.25. In the extreme case of amplitude equals 1, it's just a dusting flow. And what you can see is the larger the amplitude, the larger the reaction progress. And all these ABC3 experiments are conducted for the same amount of time. So in the same time duration, porosity wave drives higher reaction progress. And in the fourth diagram is the time-integrated free flux associated with each case. You can see as in the high amplitude wave cases, the time-integrated free flux is higher, associated with these pulses of flux due to porosity wave passing through. So we speculate that as the time-integrated fluid flux becomes approximate to each other, then the reaction progress should converge. So this is the case. We simulate the porosity wave transport case and the dusting flow case. The time is different, but time-integrated fluid flux are the same. You can see the reaction progress agrees very well. So which shows the time-integrated fluid flux control the carbonation reaction progress. Another thing we want to consider is how this porosity wave process behave in delivering carbon dioxide to shallow crust. So this is the 1D case we considered earlier. We also consider two other cases. The first one is a reactive layer, but it's thinner. The second one is a two-layer system with a buffering layer, cap layer near the surface, and doing a similar thing that porosity wave to flush through. So I show you the simulation result of a two-layer system. You can see still wave goes through, but here the XCO2 carbon dioxide fraction remains buffered in the lower layer and the top layer due to chemical reaction. And this is the transient reaction rate. This is the reaction progress. Because this XCO2 transported from here is far away from equilibrium at the bottom of the cap layer. A lot of them is buffered when it reaches the bottom. So here's the end result. For model A is the thick layer cases. The carbon dioxide outflux at here increases when the wave passes through. For model B is the dashed dot line here is this case. The carbon dioxide fluxes here also increases, but it's smaller because the XCO2 buffered by reaction is at a low value. For the two-layer cases, you can see the buffer, the reaction progress forms a spike because the reaction rate is really fast due to a large deviation from chemical equilibrium. So this series of experiments confirms that even porosity wave cannot deviate carbon dioxide from equilibrium. Basically, we achieve local equilibrium with the current kinetic parameters. The other thing is carbon concentration in fluid doesn't change much with time. The third thing is carbon fluxes is also determined by the time integrated free flux because it's buffered and buffered to be at equilibrium. So the conclusion is first, time integrated free flux controls reaction progress no matter it is deformation caused porosity wave or non-deformational dust inflow. The other is the cap layer in the two-layer cases act as a sink to stripping ascending CO2 from the metamorphic system. So it prevents CO2 from releasing to the shallow crust. The third thing is using the current kinetic parameters, carbon dioxide fraction is buffered by chemical reaction, by metamorphic system. So this explains why the through fluxes controls the entire reaction progress and explains why the thin carbonate could act as a strip layer. So the second topic I want to consider is the thermal effect in two dimensions caused by decompacting porosity wave. The motivations is from field observations initially, which former researchers discover a very sharp field metamorphic temperature gradient, like over 2 or 3 kilometers. The temperature reduces or increases sharply over 100 degrees. And this cannot be explained by the general 1D model due to continental collision because the heating rate is so low in that case. And also because that is not a mechanism for focusing such heat transport. This plot shows the oxygen isotope value in the same area. It shows the oxygen value is low in the center, but increased outward. The explanation is if you have a focused free flow, which has a lower oxygen isotope value, makes these contours of. And there's also other observations. So inside those hot region, hot spots, it's called metamorphic hot spots. Inside this region, there's abundant quartz and graphite. Graphite is another form of carbon. The network, which is a relic of free flow. Also, there's geochronology study for zircon overgrowth, which shows the quartz grows synchronously with the free flow event. And third, there's a very, very preliminary numerical calculation, which assumes there's a conduit permeable zone flowing through this region. You can see on this diagram, this is the distance from the hotspot, and this is the mineral assemblage, which reflects the temperature changes. The temperature reduces sharply over a short distance. All this evidence and the preliminary kinematical free flow model suggests the the metamorphic hotspot could be formed by focused free flow of a large amount in a very short time scale. The time scale must be short because if you allow it to sustain a longer time, the horizontal diffusion will smooth out the sharp temperature gradient. So on the other hand, there's theoretical study about two-phase flow system on the on the porosity wave, standard porosity wave in the homogeneous system. And this is just a typical porosity wave propagation in homogeneous system. It's circular shaped with a high porosity domain going upward due to buoyancy. But if you consider some heterogeneity, especially heterogeneity in viscosity, in rheology, then, for example, in this case, proposed by Podlochkov and Connolly, when fluid pressure is larger than the solid pressure, it's easier for it to open up the pre-existing grain boundaries, which means deformation is relatively easier. And this can be characterized by a reduction of bulk viscosity. But when fluid pressure is lower than the solid pressure, these grain boundaries need not to be opened up, and viscosity is a little bit larger than this case. So this asymmetric case of rheology associated with porosity wave may make the two-dimensional standard circular shaped wave into conduit like this. And these conduits act as permeable zone that focuses fluid flow and causing significant thermal transport. So we construct a two-dimensional model to see if during regional metamorphism, the fluid flow, especially when compaction is allowed to happen, how this fluid flow could contribute to thermal transfer, heat transfer. And we construct this model still below the brittle ductile transition so that rock could deform viscously. And we compare and contrast basically 4 cases depending on 2 types of boundary condition. One boundary condition is just abrupt, it's a thermal boundary condition, abrupt heating, for example, due to igneous rock intrusion. The other is gradual heating due to the geothermal flux. The other boundary condition is a fluid mechanical boundary condition. It is whether we introduce large fluid fluxes associated with magma degassing or low fluxes just due to gradual metamorphic dehydration. The model region is here, but we just show this dashed region for boundary conditions. So this is one simulation result showing that when there's abrupt magma intrusion causing abrupt temperature increase at the region bottom, and also there's externally derived magma degassing, which means large amount of fluid injection into the region, then porosity wave evolved towards a plume-shaped porosity distribution due to the upward increase in rheology. Rock becomes harder at shallower depths because temperature is lower. And then in this case, the temperature change caused by the abrupt heating boundary condition and large fluid flux is also large enough, which is comparable to field observations that produces temperature change of over 100 degrees across a distance of several kilometers. This we also observe the water content in rocks, which basically means if you heat rock, then there will be dehydration in the system. So this is a summary corresponding to the 4 types of boundary condition at the bottom, and the only case that could produce field observed scale metamorphic hotspot is to have abrupt heating boundary and large fluid flux associated with the heating event. So here is the time integrated fluid flux contours. You can see in the 4th case, the time integrated fluid flux is also very significant in comparison to others. we also launched several runs of simulations by changing the free flux at the bottom from near zero to 900 cubic meters per square meter. And these red lines are for abrupt heating boundary. This blue line are for gradual heating boundaries. As you can see, for no matter which case, as long as your area averaged time integrated free flux exceeds 600, then this thermal transfer is significant during metamorphic process. So the conclusion first is, if you consider the rock rheology to strengthen upward in the crust, then free conduits become plumed shaped, where the plume tail act as conduits and the plume head act as a dispersion zone as people studying or deposits that. Another thing is, if the area average the time integrated free flux exceeds 600, then it's possible to produce significant thermal anomaly during orogenic process. And if further this free flux case is associated with abnormal temperature input or thermal input, then metamorphic hotspots or field observation could be produced. The third conclusion is pulses of compaction-driven fluid flow may contribute to significant heat transfer during orogenesis, and which may help to explain some previously unexplained processes or observations. Okay, the third topic is I want to consider the computation between compaction and convection. The motivation for this study is first, due to compaction, the free flow direction is mostly upward. But if you have thermal and salinity buoyancy, then it's circulating. There's a downward flow and upward flow. For a simple example, the fluid direction controls mineral precipitation or dissolution, because if you have free flow direction upward, then in the direction of temperature decreasing, you can see the solubility of silica decreases, which means the fluid will dump out excess silica and precipitate minerals in the direction. The other case, if you have carbon dioxide, as in our first topic, then CO2 is also controlled by the temperature and pressure gradient in the free flow direction. So free flow pattern controls the direction, which exerts the overarching factor during mass transport. So we adopt two approaches. One is the analytical one, but this is limited only to, for example, for compacting region, only limited to the top layer, which assume compaction is very limited in this region, and the boundary condition is fixed. So we can do a linear stability analysis to see if there is a through flow in this system, whether convection could happen or not. The other is a panoramic numerical simulation of the whole process, but adding chemical and thermal buoyancy into the system. So this is the first case. We only consider this region, and the system is rigid without deformation. The effect of convection is reflected only by a through flow. So the steady state temperature gradient, temperature profile is exponential like this. And we do a linear stability analysis to find the critical Rayleigh number corresponding to different through flow velocities. And this is the definition of Rayleigh number K is the permeability, rho density, delta T is the temperature difference, L is the thickness of the layer. So here's a single example for comparison. In the no flow case, this is familiar to most of you. the critical Rayleigh number is 4 pi. But if you have a through flow, generally the Rayleigh number is increased. And we do a series of solution corresponding to different through flow velocities, which produces different porous Peckley number and regress the relationship between critical Rayleigh number and the effective Peckley number to show there's an empirical relationship, which means the compaction induced through flow just makes convection harder and harder to happen. Take a simple example for this case. If you have the required background permeability for convection in a 10-kilometer layer is 10 to minus 15, which seems small, but for crust material, it's really high. So it's hard for convection to happen. But we also noticed that there's an early study showing that if you have a through flow, convection becomes easier. So what we discover is that the boundary condition they used is a fixed thermal boundary fixed heat flux thermal boundary condition, not isothermal. And the steady state they analyzed becomes increasingly unstable as you increase the through flow velocity, which explains why they get their conclusion. But this comparison only illustrates the importance of the thermal boundary in the simplified system, which is hard to prescribe. Whether it is isothermal or fixed heat flux is not certain. It's a dynamically changing lower boundary condition. So it's hard to prescribe an accurate one. That's why we conduct the panoramic whole simulation for this compacting system. This is the similar formulation to CATS, but the only difference is we add the salinity effect and the thermal buoyancy effect. And also, because it's a panoramic model, the lowermost boundary is impermeable, and we fix the temperature here. Then we simulate this process for different cases. The first one is purely thermal convection, and in this case, the porosity is uniformly set to be 10 to minus 3, and rock viscosity is 10 to 20 for metamorphic system. And we've let the convection starts first and then switch compaction at about 1 million years. As you can see, most of the downward flow is eliminated, but horizontal flow get inherited, although it is displaced upward, because compaction in this uniform system generally do not generate horizontal pressure gradient. So the pressure gradient driving horizontal flow due to thermal buoyancy still exist. And this is the case for chemical convection. Still we let convection happen first, and then at 0.3 million years, which is when convection is fully developed, we set compaction happen. And this is the high porosity region because compaction hasn't arrived yet, and horizontal flow pattern still keeps. But free flow direction is switched mostly to upward, which basically means convection is shutting down. And this is thermal heat line convection. The result is similar to the earlier one. And this is the last case. We consider still constant porosity, but the rheology is also rock viscosity also increases upward. So it's difficult to compact at the shallow depths, but it's relatively easier to compact at lower depths. Then same strategy, but due to this time-dependent and stress-dependent rock viscosity, there is fluid compartments developing at later stages. Yeah, so this compaction starts, but you can see this high porosity region, low porosity region, and another high porosity region. So this convection is restricted in these high porosity compartments. And also, the density effects is still reflected in this vertical flow direction. Although it's still generally upward, but it's heterogeneous in this case, in the compartments. So this is the last case. The only thing is porosity and permeability is no longer homogeneous initially. We initially prescribed this empirical relationship from field observation, field measurements, and then still let the system to be able to compact and then to see the effect of compaction. So still let convection happens first, and then when it's fully developed, we let the system to compact. And the result is we have this series of, if you see in one dimension, it's one-dimensional porosity waves. This series of fluid compartments, high porosity, low porosity, another high, another low. And inside the compartments, we see the downward convective flow redevelops after these compartments reformed. So the thing is, if you do not have fluid compartments forming, then compaction basically eliminates all the downward flow in convection. But if you allow compartments to form, then inside these compartments, the rock viscosity is so high so that compaction is not quite effective. Basically means compaction happens in a very, very slow rate, so that you can deem these compartments as a non-compacting case. That's why only in the shallower level, convection redevelops. And this is a schematic diagram from a review paper summarizing the speculation from field metamorphic petrologist, which just thinks in the lower crust due to compaction fluid flow is generally upward, but in the transition zone there will be circulation. The reason is rocks is not so easy to deform, so it's like compartmentalized convection, similar to our study here. So conclusion, convection is instantaneously shut down when compaction starts, but the horizontal flow get inherited and displaced. This displacement is due to porosity and permeability reduction during compaction. Also, upward strengthening rheology in the crust makes fluid compartments to form, and this process generates an environment that facilitates convection to be redeveloped. And the third one is shallow compartments are where rejuvenated thermohaline convection could redevelop due to both the high rock viscosity and permeability. That's all my results.
Thank you, Meng. Questions?
Meng, in case of this high fluid flux in your 2D simulations, where you are getting plume shapes, do you measure the Reynolds number, or what is the density ratio?
No, we didn't monitor the Reynolds number. Only
The Reynolds number not low.
I mean, for metamorphic system, I think Reynolds number still allows we use the two-phase model, in which the free flow in the pores is laminar flow, not turbulence. But we measure the thermal Peckley number, which is high.
So trying to bring the last two bits of your talk together, in these sort of layers you talked about, it seems like the approximations in the sort of first half of the last part of the talk applied. So can you use a sort of simple, you had some critical radius number which depended on this, some number plus the square of the Peckley number. Can you sort of interpret whether you get convection or not in the sort of simulations based on this simple analysis, or is that?
I mean, the analytical approaches predicts if you have a through flow, which prohibits convection. The second one just supports it in one part because there's through flow. But the new thing is in the second numerical simulation, there's these high porosity fluid compartments developed. In that compartment, fluid the through flow velocity is not high because you have a low porosity layer which prevents injecting new fluid into it. So that compartment applies to the case of low Peckley number, which is a low Rayleigh number, low critical Rayleigh number case, and that's where convection could easily happen.
Further questions for Meng?
Maybe a naive question, but what ends up setting the length scale for like the width of your of the fingering?
You mean the plumage thing?
Yeah.
It's the diameter. It depends on the depth. In the mid-lower depth, the diameter is about 4 to 6 kilometers. But in the shallower part, when it starts to disperse, it's wider to like 10 or 12 kilometers.
And what grid resolution did you need to resolve that?
For the simulation, I think because Conley and Patologicov studied this decompaction process earlier, they said it's 8 knots per 1 compaction length scale. So I adopt to similar things.
So like half kilometer?
Half kilo? No, I think it's about.
Oh, you said compaction length.
Right, compaction length scale.
Which
So
was how big in your?
it's about, compaction length scale is about 1 kilometer, so the resolution is about 100 meters.
And could you develop a homogenized model that would get the fluxes correct at a larger scale without needing to resolve the finer structure?
What do you mean modularized model?
Well, so if we integrate over a larger area, something that's, say, several times bigger than the individual plumes, you could say what's happening there is there's a certain fluxes inside, but if I don't want to see that detail, because I want to run a simulation on a larger, at larger scales, such that it's not practical to resolve that finer structure, could I build a model that gets the behavior correct, like the integrated behavior correct?
Let me think. That's, I mean, it's hard to modularize it because I think it's like it's a time-dependent process.
Yeah.
So you have to run it from initial condition, from your initial settings. And if you, for example, if you want to run a large-scale model like tectonical scale, you just want to know if we can neglect or we can parameterize this process. Is that what you are considering?
Well,
It's a question of upscaling.
yeah, I'm interested in if we can get the right integrated behavior over larger time and space and spatial scales without needing to resolve the fine structure on the faster and smaller scales.
I personally don't think so. But also there's other parameters influence, like the shape of the diameter of the plume could be like tens of kilometers if your rheology of decompaction weakening factor is larger.
We should probably leave it at that. We just thank Meng once again. Thank you very much.